let's talk about Justice League. Not the Snyder Cut, not just yet. I want to go back a little bit in time and just, for one brief moment before moving on forever, talk about the theatrical cut that came out in November 2017, directed by Joss Whedon / Zack Snyder. And I, as of this recording, I haven't actually seen the Snyder Cut yet, and the reason why I haven't is because while I was prepping for getting invested into the Snyder Cut, I started with the Justice League theatrical cut so I could watch it and forget about it and move on, and then I did Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition. I wanted to prep myself for the Snyder Cut, but I stopped myself and I changed my mind because I knew that after watching the Snyder Cut, all of these opinions that I have on this version of the movie are going to change forever. For the better, of course. Nobody needs to convince me that the Snyder Cut is better than the theatrical version. I knew that when they announced it, like, oh, this is going to be better. But I knew that I was going to lose all these opinions. And I wanted to take a moment just to briefly defend the movie, not to say that it's a great masterpiece or to say that it's really that comparable with any of the MCU films that are out there. But when we first started this show, this was actually one of the topics that I had in mind when I came up with the idea for the Dirty Table of finding a place to defend a movie like this where I don't think it deserves as much hatred as it has gotten, or maybe just forms of disappointment. Plus, I also spent the money on the Blu-ray all those years ago, and I haven't seen the theatrical cut since the movie theater in November 2017, so I just wanted to justify my purchase of getting this Blu-ray and then kind of forgetting about it forever. So that's really what it came down to for me. So let's talk Justice League 2017. In my humble opinion, I think the movie was actually good. Not good like some other movies that I've talked about before, but it's good. It would be okay to have on if I'm watching TNT and it just comes on in the background. I do remember sitting in the movie theater. This was after I came out of actually doing a performance of Into the Woods that same evening. I was actually excited to see the movie as well as also see everyone come together on screen for the very end of the movie. Seeing all 6 heroes lined up, I'm not going to lie, I was smiling out of my seat with joy seeing everyone stand together, including Superman at the very end. And that opinion still holds true even when I did see this film all these years later. I was still excited to see everyone come together. In terms of, I'm going to break down most of the important players in this story, in this overall narrative that was created. So let's at least let's step into Steppenwolf for a moment. I didn't think he was as underdeveloped or as poorly CGI'd as some would suggest. I think he got a lot of flack for just kind of being a very standard villain. And no matter what anyone tries to sell me, I still do think that Steppenwolf was just never going to be a good choice for the first Justice League movie. No matter how much backstory you give, and I know that there's much more backstory with him and much more understanding of his motivations in the Snyder Cut. I get that. But how is it that we still haven't gotten, say, Brainiac, an OG Superman villain? How have we not gotten him on the silver screen yet? How have we gone all these decades without having a central Superman movie involve Brainiac, aside from just Lex Luthor, same old, same old? I think you could have easily had Brainiac relate to Darkseid in some creative way, the same way that Loki and Thanos related to each other at the end of Avengers. Like, they're mostly separate, but they were able to kind of come together, even though Joss Whedon came up with the Thanos idea near the very end of production, but I think it paid off in the long run for what the MCU wanted to do. But I think you could have been creative with a Brainiac and Darkseid relationship. Or if you wanted to just stick with the Darkseid route and come up with a creative way to bring him in eventually in the future, I think you could have easily gone with Granny Goodness, who I think is the most engaging out of all of Darkseid's baddies. I think Calabec is a little more on the basic side, but still interesting enough to watch portrayed on screen, like maybe get Andy Serkis or someone to come in and be that character. The female Furies, much more dynamic, even as just 3 individual warriors. I just think all of them would have been better choices than Steppenwolf. I was never sold on Steppenwolf when he was announced to be the villain for both for Justice League, and I'm not sure if he was actually supposed to be the central guy for both Part 1 and Part 2 of Justice League when it was originally announced that we were getting Part 1 in 2017 and Part 2 in 2019. But regardless, I think it would have just been a creative waste. There are just so many other villains that you could have played with in the DC pool rather than Steppenwolf. But that being said, I do still think that he as a villain was more engaging than both Ronan the Accuser and Malekith. So to me, that's a passing grade. I know that there's more Steppenwolf in the Snyder Cut, which is fantastic and great. I just don't think there was absolutely nothing to work with him. I got an understanding that he's working for Darkseid. He's, trying to appease his master. He's trying to right wrongs from the previous war that took place all those centuries ago. I wasn't questioning his motives. I got the bare necessities that I needed from him in order to move on with the story. It didn't hold me up. Let's jump to Superman. For me, the lack of Superman in this theatrical cut was okay, because we already had 2 other films prior that gave us an understanding of who this specific Superman was. But in this theatrical cut, this is where he really became Superman. Very light and funny and witty and just kind of having a good time with all of his super pals, which he really wasn't before. He was much more dark and very internal and didn't quite know how to work well with kind of the American government and kind of just everyone as a whole. It feels like a 50-50 split on if Superman really was a good guy or if he was going to kill us at any point. And he was meant to be the beacon of hope for this team, and I really thought that worked well, especially towards the end when Superman does come in, and he's the guy that the Justice League needs in order to stop the threat of Steppenwolf beginning the apocalypse for Earth to become Apocalypse, basically. Even if Joss Whedon and the creative team were given permission to make this a 2.5-hour film rather than the strict 2-hour cut that WB mandated for them, I am sure that we could have gotten maybe some more interesting interactions for Supes and everyone else. He didn't really get a chance to talk to Aquaman all that much. Very little bits with Barry Allen, little bits with Cyborg. I think he really didn't have anything to do with Wonder Woman in this movie, which I think that was a bit of a lost opportunity. But I wasn't bothered as much by this as much as some other people were, because I was okay with focusing more on Batman as the central-ish character of this Justice League movie, trying to put everyone together, especially since we had only just had Batman from BVS. So I was fine with the lack of Superman. I understand that some people really wanted more of him, but if you had Superman involved, you wouldn't have had any time at all with Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg, so I will take what I could get out of this. With Flash, he did feel a little weird to me when I first saw the film, only because there are 2 Barry Allens on the big screen and the small screen. Grant Gustin's Flash from the TV series. By this point, he already had 4 seasons under his belt, so it just felt weird to see one Barry Allen and then have a separate Barry Allen on screen. Not that I'm not comfortable with the multiverse idea, I just wasn't sure what what Warner Brothers wanted to do with having 2 separate characters, especially since they've made it very clear between the Arrowverse and the films that they want a separation of characters. When they were trying to do a Suicide Squad in the Arrowverse, WB pulled the plug on that real quick because they wanted to push their own movie out. So that was a little bit of an adjustment to make, but now that we're in 2021, and of course we've seen 2 Barry Allens interact from the movieverse and the TV-verse on the same screen together, I'm much more comfortable with the idea of having 2 separate Barry Allens. But it did take me out a little bit of the movie when I first saw this. Some of the jokes of Ezra Miller in this did feel a little forced, but I also feel like I still got everything I needed out of Barry to know who this Barry Allen was. Not everyone has the general audience. Not everyone has the knowledge going into this movie of who Barry Allen was if they didn't already watch the TV show. But I still felt like we got just enough to know who he was. His dad is in jail. They established that his dad is in jail because of a crime that Barry knows he didn't commit, and there's enough there to work with. While I do think it's on the weaker side, I don't think it's absolutely nothing. But I'll take the focus. I'll take the character focus on having more Batman to establish Ben Affleck as Batman over needing to establish Flash, I guess. But that's just more personal preference. I do remember when the public consensus after Justice League came out was they were calling for the new trinity of the DC Extended Universe to be Wonder Woman, Flash, and Aquaman. And that's how bad the hate for Superman and Batman as a whole got from this film franchise, and it just never sat well with me. The Trinity is the Trinity for a reason. No disrespect to Aquaman or Flash, but I felt the idea of having these comedic-ish characters be the forefront of this film franchise going forward just didn't sit well with me. I also felt that we got really everything we needed to out of Aquaman, because I don't think of Jason Momoa as a deep actor. Personally, I'm sorry. I'm sure he's great at any given party. He's a great drinking buddy. I just don't see him as someone who's too deep into his work. I think he's a good actor, but I personally wouldn't give him an Oscar or an Emmy for anything that he's done. Especially now that we have Aquaman, the movie, out as a whole, which who knew that was going to go on to become the biggest DC film of all time. It was very much a bro story, very similar to kind of what Chris Hemsworth has done with Thor. But in my mind, that's all you really needed to know about this Aquaman. I think, again, just enough to know who this guy was, but focusing on other characters in this universe. So I'm not as phased. I definitely remember people criticized Wonder Woman in this movie, Gal Gadot, her portrayal in this movie, for being mopey. And I definitely remember disagreeing with that statement to a certain degree. Having the first movie, the original Wonder Woman movie, under our belts by this point of when the movie came out, it felt nice to kind of know that she had still longed for Steve Trevor in some way, because that really wasn't able to play in BVS, because that movie hadn't come out at that point. And I felt that played, and I thought even among the reshoots and everything, that Gal Gadot still was able to play her entire movie experience with this first Wonder Woman movie and put that into here, and it still played. It was nice to see that there was some form of payoff from the first movie here, as she still struggled to get close to people after, being immortal and living on Earth for so long, just being alone and not trying to get close to anybody, because she still feels like the carpet's going to be pulled right from underneath her feet again after falling in love with someone the first time. And I think you even see more of that when you take Wonder Woman 1984 into account by watching this theatrical cut, that you can still see that even with that movie, she is still hesitant to get close to anyone because her love came back from the dead, and then she had to lose him a second time. Also can be borderline traumatic to some degree. And of course, if you haven't seen our Wonder Woman 1984 review, you can find that on our YouTube channel as well. And I think that Gal just has a great chemistry kind of with anyone that she works with, and I think they correctly capitalized on her popularity as a character for this ensemble film after Wonder Woman had come out a few months prior. I'll dive more into Batfleck as an overall character later on when I talk more about BVS, but I was happy to see more Batman here and a focus on his trying to assemble this team to combat these aliens from the skies after taking on street thugs for 20 years up to this point. He's not a people person, this Bruce Wayne. He doesn't want to be a leader, but he knew he needed a team to fight this large threat that was coming, and he was the only one with any mental capacity to take on that role, even though he was reluctant to do it. I do think the funniest moments from the reshoots with what is clearly Joss Whedon working his directorial style in, I do think the funniest moments come from Ben Affleck portraying a Batman who has no business working with metahumans at all, who can just punch him with a flick of the wrist and he just has to take it with all the brute force of it because he's only human. That to me was rather funny. And I thought it was effective, and it still helped my personal assertion that he's actually my favorite Bruce Wayne Batman combo in live action. I think Christian Bale is a great Bruce Wayne. I really like Michael Keaton as a separate Batman, but just my overall favorite silver screen combo is Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne and Batman. And that's not to say that he's my favorite Batman overall. Kevin Conroy will always be my favorite Batman, and I'm sure for many of you watching, he is probably the same. He is the voice of Batman when you read a comic book. But in terms of just live action portrayals, I like Ben Affleck's the most. Sorry. Hot topic. And lastly, I want to just briefly touch on Cyborg. I do think he was definitely underutilized in this movie. It would have been nice to see much more from him. He definitely was the Hawkeye of the group and got the short end of the stick. But honestly, I still felt a connection to him thanks in part to what Ray Fisher was giving us on screen. It is a shame that there was apparent misconduct on set with him and apparently others, and this includes Joss Whedon, Jeff Johns, who was in charge of DC at the time, and even now, long after the movies come out, with the current DC Films president, Walter Hamada. And Ray Fisher has stated that he'll only return for a DC film if Zack Snyder is at the helm, just because he enjoyed working with him so much. It's a shame because even without having seen the Snyder Cut, again, I do think that there was enough. There's one moment in particular in the theatrical cut where Cyborg is talking to his dad, and he's saying to him, "Have you told anyone at Star Labs about the monster in the house?" And Cyborg's dad is going on to talk about, "Yeah, no, we haven't told anyone yet because we weren't sure." And then Ray Fisher just comes in with the clean hit of, "Oh, you thought I was talking about me." And it just hit my soul so much. And that was really the only true moment that we got from Cyborg. I'm well aware of that. But it still hit really strong. And that was Ray Fisher just giving it everything he had, even with all these reshoots and everything. And I appreciated this portrayal of a guy who's just clearly become so stone cold that he also doesn't know how to open up to all these people like the Flash and even Superman when he's coming up to him near the very end of the movie. Obviously, it would have been great to have more of him, but I think given the material that he had and the small screen time that he did wind up having in this theatrical cut, I still enjoyed it from his standpoint. And of course, I know that we're getting more of him in the Snyder Cut, so I very much look forward to viewing that. Overall, there is a lot of blame to go around on this movie on why it only made $800,000 at the box office, not hitting the $1 billion mark that it would have needed to break even. Joss Whedon Frankensteined a project by adding comedy to a established, serious DC film universe and just changed the tone, direction, and major plot elements of this story. But also, Warner Brothers as a whole are also seriously to blame here. And I don't know if they've gotten enough of the blame for this. It's not the first time that Warner Brothers has jumped ship from a DC project at the midway point, or even a movie universe as a whole. Batman Forever saw the departure of Tim Burton because Batman Returns was too violent for all the toy sales that they were trying to make. And eventually, we got Batman Forever, and of course, eventually, Batman and Robin. We know how all that goes. Rest in peace, Joel Schumacher. Superman Returns made $500 million in 2006, which was good money back then. But that wasn't good enough for Warner Brothers, so they canceled the 2009 sequel shortly after that. Ben Affleck was to direct his own solo Batman movie within this universe, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant idea. Batman in control of his own story. My God, it makes perfect sense. A superhero just forming everything that they need in order to tell the best story possible. Makes perfect sense. But they abandoned it after his latest solo film at the time, Live by Night, didn't pan out as successfully as Argo, which won Best Picture a few years prior to that. And he hasn't directed anything since. Movie studios abandon projects all the time. It's not unheard of. You want to back up what you think is going to work, what you think is going to sell, what's going to translate into ticket sales. It makes financial and logistical sense to put out the best products possible. You know, when you announce your upcoming film slate of projects for the audience to see. But the reason why Marvel Studios has worked for all this time is because they don't abandon their projects, concepts, or characters. They have had directors come and go on various projects, just like any other film in Hollywood, not uncommon. But the producers had a clear vision for what they wanted with their storytelling. And if a director couldn't work with that, then they simply just weren't right for the job. Edgar Wright certainly comes to mind from 2015's Ant-Man. Now compare this to every other Hollywood studio where the vision is simply make money. Warner Brothers finally got on the bandwagon of having someone oversee the DC properties, and again, currently the DC Films president is Walter Hamada, who oversaw the production of the Conjuring film series and It from 2017. So his experience isn't superheroes, it's horror films. And this was already after Jeff Johns was the president of the studio. He stepped down But also, this was the guy who was in charge of all of DC, so it made sense for him to be the president at the time. But once Justice League flopped, he decided to step down and focus on other things. So they were already reshuffling even after this crossover film came out. My point is, they still don't know what they're doing. And it has become incredibly tough to defend all of DC as a whole when their competition has just skyrocketed. I mean, since Justice League, Infinity War, Endgame, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, even Spider-Man Far From Home, we've gotten so much more from the other side since then that you can't help but feel like DC's being left in the dust. So because of these circumstances, we got Justice League in 2017 after it was already conceived as a 2-part story and transformed into a 2-hour lighthearted tale with action. They changed it midway through the production. I will touch on Zack Snyder as a person when I do talk about the director's cut. And for a movie meant to get us closer to Darkseid and cater to a bigger overall universe, I felt like this film, the 2017 theatrical cut, I do feel like it accomplished that. Was it better than the first Avengers movie? Absolutely not. It didn't need to be for me. It needed to feel big, and the stakes needed to be high enough to continue the narrative for future movies. And I felt that they accomplished that, and I was especially hyped on the idea of the Injustice League that was teased at the end of this movie, because they would have been far more interesting than Steppenwolf in any given movie universe, no matter which way you sell it to me. I do see why this film, however, does feel like very middle of the pack in terms of superhero storytelling. It's meh. I get it. Overall, as a fan of superhero movies, I do feel that Shazam, Joker, Wonder Woman 1984, and really almost any Marvel movie is better than this one. I even liked Man of Steel and Batman v Superman more than this one, especially after having just recently watched all of them together. There was clear choices and directions being made even in both of these movies. But I never thought this movie was awful enough to warrant abandoning the complete shared universe concept. I think they bailed too early on their ideas before this movie was released and after this movie came out. When does that ever happen in movies? That you just abandon something during and after a film, especially when you've already announced upcoming projects and such. That never happens. And this movie is the result of a company with bad management who doesn't understand what their coworkers need and what their customers truly want. The Justice League theatrical version is a workplace problem. It's not a bad movie, but I am very happy that we are getting a replacement film. And as of this conversation that we're having, I don't really need to see the Snyder Cut to know that. I've seen this movie. I've seen the cut. I finally got my money's worth for, all $20. And I can move on to what is clearly going to be a better version of the film, even without having seen it. What do you guys think on this? Let me know. Feel free to comment down below. Like the video if you want. Hit the follow button if you follow us on Twitch. Subscribe to us if you're with us on YouTube. And as always, make sure you check out Knights of the Dirty Table every Friday live at 5. I messed up. Check out Knights of the Dirty Table every Friday live at 5, only on Twitch, the Zenden Studios. Thanks so much, guys, and we will see you later. Whoa! Welcome to the end of the Knights of the Dirty Table video that you just watched. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to our channel, like our video, share with all your friends, and catch our live stream every Friday live at 5, only on the Zenden Studios Twitch channel. I gotta go wander off into space. See ya! Whoa! Whoa!